Thank you, Board. My name is Roland Brady, and I'm here to speak in favor of the proposals, both proposals. I have a PhD in geology, and I've taught watershed hydrology and engineering geology for over 20 years, and I'm the Miles Steward with the Parkway Foundation on Steelhead Creek. One of the important aspects of the proposals was to include the infrastructure, critical infrastructure, with the urban creeks as well as with the parkway, and I favor that because the urban creeks not only supply groundwater recharge and surface water to the Sacramento River, they're also critical habitat, and I would like to discuss that. The creeks that were on the map right there included Arcade Creek and Steelhead Creek. I have most of my experience on these two. The creeks are all in the area, all bordered by levees, and many of them have floodplains. Steelhead Creek flows all year. Dry Creek usually runs dry, as does Arcade Creek this time of year. And these are two views of the winter view showing the floodplain and the levees. The Central Valley steelhead and Central Valley Chinook salmon find these creeks to be their home. They migrate up Steelhead Creek and they spawn in Arcade Creek. The majority of California steelhead are listed under Federal Endangered Species Act. And we got a note from NOAA Marine Fisheries that outlined with dwindling populations and passage issues, preserving local habitat is more important than ever. The protection for these waterways comes from no dumping laws, punishable by 6 months in jail and or a $1,000 fine. However, dumping goes on day after day. On the left is a large camp on Steelhead Creek that was, we had permission to remove 68,000 pounds of debris from this camp on Steelhead Creek. And the one on the right shows a more typical camp on the inside of the bank on Arcade Creek. This is also on the floodplain. These represent point source contamination. The red triangles represent camps on Steelhead Creek. So there are many, many, many of them. They're just not a few, but they're distributed all along the side of the channel. Now, these camps and these concentrations of debris are vulnerable to flooding when the creek on the left becomes those views on the right, and both of those are Steelhead Creek during high flows. You can see water completely covers the floodplain, and the aftermath of this is grim. All of the debris that had accumulated on the floodplain gets washed into the water. Now, we have done a number of debris surveys, 15 of them, and keep track of all of the type of debris, the volume of the debris, and the weight of the debris. So we know exactly what's going into the water and what's being stored on the floodplain. This was removed from an area in Steelhead Creek that includes toxic chemical wastes, pathogenic waste, human and dog feces and needles, and solid debris. In the stream channel, all of the debris on the left came from that 25 by 30 foot area on the right. Solid waste, the worst players are plastics, especially bags, sheet and styrofoam, textiles, tents, tarps, bedding, carpet remnants, and shopping carts. Now, plastics are particularly bad, and they form two kind of groups. One of them is little worm-like bodies that look like food for fish, and they eat them, but of course they can't digest them. And then plastic nanoparticles, and these are very fine particles that enter the tissue of organisms, and they themselves are toxic. Now, I wanted to point out that the life of the creek is not the water you see flowing, but is the water that's flowing in the substrate below that, through the sand and the gravel. That carries oxygen and vital nutrients to the organisms that live in that substrate, in that sand and gravel. And the fish eggs live there. Without oxygen, that whole hyporeik zone is dead. And that's what's happening with the textiles and the plastics. It's forming an armor on the bottom of the channel, and it's choking out the life in the bottom of the streams. In places we've found there's 60 to 90% of the channel bottom is covered with this armor. Shopping carts are another bad player. They form physical barriers to the flow of water, so they not only decrease the flow capacity of the channel, but they form islands that accrete vegetation and debris, and this reduces the fish passage, barriers to the fish passage. So what I'm asking is that the ordinance really only abide by existing state law. The California Fish and Game Code 5652 says it is unlawful to deposit, permit to pass into, or place where it can pass into waters of the state. These are all of the waters we've been talking about, or to abandon, dispose of, or throw away within 150 feet of the high water mark of the waters of the state any cans, bottles, garbage, motor vehicle parts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So basically what the ordinance is saying is this. This is an existing state law, and if you look at the waterways as part of critical infrastructure, you'll see that it's covered with this. And most of what we're talking about right here, we would not have this discussion if this law had been assiduously abided by all along or had been enforced. 150 feet for the high water line, and this all could have been avoided. Thank you.